Are we live? Oh, it's a recording. An unpleasant and often strong emotion caused by anticipation or an awareness of danger. It's an instance of this emotion and a state marked by the emotion itself. In between the anxious concern and the solicitude, many find a profound reverence or an awe toward one's God. That was a combination of Webster's definitions for the word fear. Fear is a primal word by nature. It activates our fight-or-flight complex and it's physically felt in a way words can't completely convey. So we convey it in our films, our literature, our art,
leading them to believe the man they arrested is a mass murderer.
And our passions.
O.J. Simpson is still traveling.
We let our minds run wild on what could be, has been, has not, and should not. We develop monsters that end up as reflections of not just ourselves, but society at that time period. We instill fears on our children through stories and folklore that many of us carry and continue to be wary of as adults. With no malice in our hearts, we share these stories of an excitement and a curiosity for the unknown. In the first pages of The Shining, in the introduction, before the story even begins, was a quote that sticks with me as it does many others. Monsters are real, and ghosts are real too. They live inside us, and sometimes they win. The quote continues on theatrically for the sake of the book, but what it's implying is heavily inferred. Welcome, welcome. Take a seat. My name's Dr. Cat. We teach a class today. First project, Project Horror. We'll be doing an in-depth synopsis on the origins of fear. Alright, where were we? Intro, right? Our imaginations have the uncanny ability to perpetually create stories that echo through time itself. Stories so old, people often forget who wrote them as they're passed year from year. Over hundreds of years, we've created a culture of horror that's devolved into a set of particular genres. And every single one of them has an origin. Psychological horror exists in almost every movie by some measure, but not every movie will always fit the categorical mold.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture.
But the ones that do have a tendency to change our minds and leave us with a powerful thought or idea. They have the ability to bend the rules and have us reconsider concepts from alternative perspectives. When we question situations, a process begins in our brain, similar to the turning of an initial gear that starts an engine. This process goes by the name of instinctive elaboration, and it's a compulsive mechanism that's heavily toyed with in these types of films. But before we get too deep, let's start from the beginning. What I'm about to describe is a tale involving a series of events spiraling into inexplicable ambiguity. The story of madness, a story of love, a story of malicious hatred. These said events transpired in a small German town by the name of Holstenwall. Dim street lights and their ambient glow puddled the wet streets as the town unknowingly waits its new arrival. A strange man named Dr. Caligari has appeared on the scene, boasting a supernatural ability. He claims the ability to predict the future and see the beyond. However, he's about to find out he could indeed see everything coming. Everything but his own fate.
The Roaring Twenties, aka the Golden Age of Hollywood.
An established director by the name of Robert Wien would cross paths with a relatively unknown writer named Hans Janowitz. They found each other among similar circles, among philosophers, poets, physicists, and other great minds of the era. However, let's take a small detour. While acknowledging the film's impact and its ripples throughout the industry, it's important to highlight the emerging film styles and those that were forming nearby and aspects that inspired Robert and Hans in their work together. You see, like almost any great idea, the movie was a reimagining and a culmination of present trends. Trends that often involved injecting emotions from the story within the movie on a deeper level, whether it was visual ambience or physical cue from an actor. Sometimes providing even an emptiness in the script for a
Dramatic pause.
The period following World War I is often dubbed an era where the film industry culture peaked. Its influence extended far beyond the lot. Amidst the looming effects of World War I, hyperinflation, and a tumultuous anguish consuming people's minds, it was only natural for art to shine through in the darkest of corners. Now that we have a general understanding of their surroundings, it will assist us on our journey in horror quantification. Alright, back to the story. It's just a simple beginning for a complex story. The scene is set with two men sitting at a bench. As the men sit, a tale would be shared. A tale with twists and turns, tearing apart the negative grounding that builds a continuous plotline. As the man's fiancée walks by, a shared memory of his would be told. It's in this shared memory of horror our story would turn its first page. Come one, come all, come on down to the great show. Witness a miracle before our very eyes. Introducing Dr. Caligari and his assistant, Caesar. Mysterious claims and ominous predictions will be presented to us. Keep your eyes keen and your wits about you. You're in for a show. After great hesitance from the officials, Dr. Caligari presented his abominable tricks at a local hole-in-the-wall carnival. Accompanying him was a casket. Accompanying the casket was a man by the name of Caesar. The man allegedly had been struck by the Sandman for 23 years, which induced the ability to see future premonitions. Quite a trick to be seen, unheard of, and the first of its kind. People gathered around to witness this devil's miracle. But what people didn't realize was this miracle would bring consequences, an utter fate and a nuisance to the city. Caligari would introduce Caesar as his somnambulist, a person who succumbs to shenanigans while sleeping. However, these so-called shenanigans would devolve from harmless predictions into predicting the death of a local man. He gives the man his fate in 3 words: until dawn tomorrow. Definitely not something you want to hear if one has plans next Saturday. The man receiving this unfortunate prediction went by the name of Alan. Alan and his friend Francis were attending the carnival that night. As the crowd yearned for their predictions, many shouts were heard, but only one answer was received. It was to Alan directly. And it was those 3 dreaded words, words which sealed his fate, ending his life with a knife later that night. Francis did not take this lightly. He immediately began investigating for foul play. He attempted to notify the local police with assistance from Alan's sister Jane. However, these allegations and suspicions fell on deaf ears when notifying the local law. People of the city became sheep to the wolf that stayed before them. Skepticism converted to fear as more and more people were plucked away one by one. Narratives were expanding and twists were turning. Levers were pulling and the curtains were closing. Not only was Alan's sister related to the story by blood, but intimately related to the scenario via an entanglement with Francis. Jane would then later attend a show seeing Caesar in the flesh. She then developed a superstitious infatuation of her own, driving her dangerously close to the monster that was Caesar. For that reason alone, it was not surprising to see her demise come at the hands of Caesar, furthering and contorting the plotline. After the death of Jane and his best friend Alan, Francis' gung-ho attitude was unquenchable. He wanted more than answers. As Francis followed Caligari, tailing him from location to location, he would end up at an asylum. It's yet another twist, revealing that Caligari was not just a snake oil salesman of miracles, but a custodial director of the asylum itself. The lunacy he projected onto the town was an aspect he overseed in his own professional matters. A madhouse indeed. Among the doubts and accusations was one thing for certain. Dr. Caligari was a strange man, a man who had lost the plot entirely, with a stubborn obsession consuming his every action. His fascination was focused on a monk whose name he egregiously stole for his own. The monk in question utilized the same method to terrorize the town with his murderous somnambulist. Dr. Caligari was actively trying to replicate this.
It's time to stop!
Alright, let's recap. In a twist of twists and a tangle of plots inside inner plots, if one blinks, they could easily lose track of the story itself. If we recall in sequential order, however, we begun on a park bench, with two men sharing a tale. We then follow that tale into a story of romance, hate, and murder. The monster known by Caesar then begins reenacting the disturbed actions of an ancient monk by the command and legions of Caligari himself. After the town succumbs to a murderous rampage by the hands of Caesar, Alan and his sister Jane are eliminated in the process. With his love interest deceased and his best friend wrongly slain, Francis' lust for justice and revenge grew stronger than ever. However, all is not what it seems. As the walls closed in on Caligari, the road ahead would reveal yet again another twist. As Francis investigated, the staff in the asylum grew increasingly suspicious, and his plan collapsed in catastrophic failure. Dr. Caligari was then left with only two options: to either face reality or keep living under false pretenses. However, facing reality was a decision that would cost him his sanity and his freedom, removing him as a staff member and institutionalizing him as a patient in that very same building. At this moment, our tale meets its end in a non-traditional sense. For the story we've been hearing was actually the ramblings of a madman, the tenacious tangents of a mind untamed by sanity and logic. Between the crevice of a dream world and the vague makings of one's physical surroundings, we heard a twisted tale. Once again, everything is not as it seems. Francis all along was institutionalized himself. There was no park bench, there wasn't a fiancé, and the only circus in town was the one performing in his mind. Sitting beside him in the entirety of the story was his clinician. In fact, he was sitting with the director of the institution itself, someone who had taken great priority in him. A man who was featured greatly in his fantasies, Dr. Caligari. This film deferred interest in many. Even when the silver screen stopped rolling, the effects of its style did not. Stories that contorted the normal frame of a hero or villain were popularized. Ambiguous trends and tediously twisted plot lines became a staple. The German Expressionist movement was far from done. With a new entry to come along the way shortly, this following movie would be one of many that would transcend oceans and impact many walks of life from different cultures. You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.